Hello everyone, I'm here today to do a review of The Shadow King by Maaza Mengiste. This is part of the long list of the Booker Prize, and I read it with Kieran from KD Books, who runs the Booker Boy book club. And this book tells the story of the war between Ethiopia and Italy when Mussolini tried to invade Ethiopia in the 30s. So this book, it's an interesting one because I feel a bit conflicted about it. It's a very bold book. It has a lot of bold moves, some of which work better than others for me, but we will talk about that. Let's start with the positives, right? So I thought that this book was very well written in the sentence level. It gave a lot of atmosphere of how Ethiopia is, and I love for example, the descriptions of the food, injera, the relationships in between people. I thought that was very evocative of the places and the culture of Ethiopia, and I also liked that it did not explain Ethiopia to the reader. It assumed certain knowledge, and if the reader didn't know anything about Ethiopia, they would have to do their own research to understand the book. And I did like that because often in Western cultures we assume that everyone has the same knowledge about Western history and civilization, and that the most clear example I can think about relating to that is Walhall by Hilary Mantel. She assumes that we know everything about Henry VIII and Thomas Cromwell, and as a non-English person or non-British person, I didn't know half of the things, but I did my research on it, and I often feel like we are assumed to not know about Ethiopia but know about Britain. So in this book, the author is writing for the Ethiopians, and it's writing assuming that you do know certain things about Ethiopia, and if not, you were going to put the work that it takes to understand Ethiopia. And that means also that people that do not know so much will miss some references. I probably missed a lot of references to a lot of things, but at the same time it normalizes the fact that Ethiopia is just a country like anybody else, and we should know more about it. So I liked that, and I thought that was a very bold move, especially when it's been commercialized more widely in the Western world. So yeah, I really like that, and I also found the concept of the book very interesting. So this is commercialized as the history of the women that fought in this war, and I liked the concept, and in the first part of the book that's exactly what we get, and I was super excited. We get a lot of talk about Hirut, who is the main, I would say one of the main characters, and she's a servant girl in this very powerful Ethiopian household. Kidane, the husband of this household, is a high official in Haile Selassie's army, and so we get a sense of her character and also the wife of Kidane, Aster, and how they don't just accept things as they come, and they are all submissive and so on. And I really like that because in my experience, many cultures assume that women have to be submissive, and sometimes they are even considered as a baggage in the family. Like most families will want sons, and although that is still true in many aspects in African countries, the African cultures have been exposed to actually value women a lot more than other cultures. So, for example, one example of that is that when a couple marries in many countries, like especially in Asia, the family of the bride will give dowry to the family of the groom because she is assumed to be a burden and the family should pay for her stay in the family of the groom. In African cultures, at least the ones I have been exposed to, it's the other way around. The groom's family pays money or pays with goats or whatever. It has to give a gift to the family of the bride because it is considered that the family of the bride is losing something by her moving into his house. And that gives you an idea that even though the whole concept of dowry has its own issues, women are valued in that society, even though in another sense they might not be given a voice, their value is still recognized. And in the first part of the book we follow Hirut, and she talks about how her father fought in the war and had this gun and this cape and all this memorabilia from that war, and he gave it to her, and he taught her how to shoot and how to be independent, and I really like that. I thought that was great. However, that's only in the first part of the book. This book is about 400 pages, and the first part is 100 pages, and then it continues into the war, and it focuses so much more in the men of the war than in the women. We still follow Hirut in part of the book. She fights in the war, and she becomes a prominent figure, and she's in part responsible to find the Shadow King, which is so Haile Selassie was a very egocentric person, and when the war took a turn for the worse for the Ethiopians, he decides to run away basically to Britain, and the Ethiopians are left without nothing, and so she takes upon herself to find someone to replace Haile Selassie, and she finds this person that looks a lot like him, so he becomes the Shadow King, and the Hirut and many other women fought below him for the Ethiopian army. But even though these women are still in the story in the second and third part, I think that they take a secondary role, like the agency is in the men, and also we focus a lot less on what they think, what they want, what they are fighting for, why they are fighting for what they are fighting. And in that sense, that disappointed me. And I don't know if it is because this was marketed as the story of the women, and that's not what it is. It is the story of the war, and sometimes it includes women, but it's not the story of the women. It doesn't give the agency, it doesn't give the voice to the women, and that was disappointing. That was very disappointing for me in this book, and I think that took me out of the story quite a bit. I said that this book was very bold in many ways, and another way in which it is very bold is the structure. So this book is structured in mainly 3 parts, and within each part we have a narrative, and then the narrative is cut to include interludes, chorus, and photos. So the interludes are mostly from Haile Selassie's point and what he's doing, because obviously he's not big part of the story since he ran away, but he still has some agency or something to do and to say in the story. and then the chorus are more about the collective of all these people fighting for Ethiopia. And finally the photos are from an Italian Jew that is involved in the war, and he's taking photos all throughout the story, and we get basically descriptions of snapshots or photos. And this is a very bold way to do this. The chorus and the interlude, I think that they borrow from the Greek and Latin literature, the classic literature, and the classic plays. And then I think that there's also some points in which, for example, there are parallels to the story of Icarus. So there's all this mythology woven in. And even though I think it's a bold move to make and it's an interesting choice from the point of storytelling, it did not work for me. I think that for me it made it feel choppy in ways, and it made me drag myself out of the story. And for example, for the case of the photos, we don't really know where these photos are coming from for a while until we find out about this Italian Jew soldier. So it was all a bit mashed together in a way that was just making it complicated for the sake of being complicated in my view. And then the other thing with this story is that it follows so many characters. There are so many characters and when we are introduced to these characters, we are not really sure if they are really important to the story or not. So there is all these new names that are, many of them are Ethiopian, and then there are so many you don't even know if they're men or women, and then they're interwoven in the story, and maybe you think that one of them is important and then it turns out it's not, and it's all very confusing. Until you get the rhythm of the book, it gets very confusing. And for me, that together with the structure made it very complex, unnecessarily complex to follow in a way that took me out of the story. And the two last sections dragged so much for me because I was taken out of the story because I was not getting what these people were feeling, or I didn't follow what these people were doing in a more logical way for how my brain works. So even though I think it was an interesting choice, it did not work for me. I know that it works for other people, but it did definitely not work for me. So yeah, in a summary way, I do think that there are valuable things from this book. I think that it makes some interesting and bold choices that I really appreciate, and I see why those choices made this book be in the long list of the Booker Prize. But as a reading experience, I didn't find the book enjoyable, and I found it disappointing because it was not doing what I thought it was gonna do. I didn't do what promised in the blurb and in all the marketing. And in the first part I thought it was going to do something, and then it completely went into another direction. And I think that it's not only the marketing, because there's at the end an author's note explaining that this story was inspired by the author's great-grandmother who fought in one of these wars, and how most of the times when we think about war, we only think about the men in the war, but there are actually many wars in which women are involved, and they are soldiers and they fight the same, but they are never mentioned. So in that sense, it's not only that the publisher thought this was gonna sell, the author herself says that this is what she was trying to do, and from my point of view, that's not what she did. So in that sense, the promise of the book got a bit broken. And yeah, so is it worth reading? Maybe. Is it deserving of the long list of the Booker Prize? Maybe. Is it a book that I will reread and enjoy again? Definitely not. So yeah, those are my thoughts on this book. I hope you found something valuable in this review. Let me know if you have read the book or if you want to read it. Also, if you are following the long list of the Booker Prize, and I'll talk to you in the next video. Bye!